He's not polarizing, he's brilliant. And that terrifies people.
He is the epitome of the American dream, but he is also the personification of the American nightmare.
Mr. Trump needs to understand the world does not revolve around his penis.
I never would have looked at him before and thought, that's the man I want running for president. But boy, do I love him now.
The first time I met Donald Trump, we were in his offices at Trump Tower, and the first thing he did is he walked me around the office and showed me all the framed magazine covers of himself that he had on his walls. What you have to understand about Donald Trump is he has a highly cinematic sense of himself. Generally, what he likes to do is sit home and eat cheeseburgers and watch movies. Before he went into real estate, he wanted to go into the movie business. And he told me that he had thought about moving to Hollywood and becoming a film producer. Throughout the time that I was with him, he constantly talked about films or actors that he was fascinated by. At one point, he said to me that Clint Eastwood is the greatest movie star who's ever lived. And I think Clint Eastwood throwing his poncho over his shoulder as the man with no name and wiggling his fingers around his six-gun is how Donald thinks of himself. It's why he slants his eyes. I think he's practiced a Clint Eastwood look a million times in the mirror. And he fancies himself this person occupying his own Trump-produced, Trump-directed, Trump-written production. You know, the life of Trump.
To know and be around Donald Trump is to be always the audience for his self-indulgence. I ended up in a helicopter ride with Don King and Donald Trump, and it was surreal because the whole flight, I'm sitting there looking from one to the other, talking about how great they were. And I'm not even saying it in a negative. They were just promoting themselves, not even listening to each other, talking nonstop. When we did get to Atlantic City, he said, circle the boardwalk. I want Reverend Al to see my empire. And he showed, I own that hotel, I own that. Then he showed me this area that was going to build the Trump Taj Mahal. Right off the boardwalk was this impoverished area of mostly African Americans. And I'm saying, well, what is it going to mean to them? He never really answered the question. It was bluster, it was talk. I remember when he started becoming very well known in the birther movement. He insisted that Barack Obama was born in Kenya, meaning he was not legally qualified to be president because by the Constitution you have to be a natural United States citizen by birth. Donald Trump saying, he's not only an outsider, he's an African. He's illegit. So I ended up with a meeting with Donald Trump and I in his office. I'm not a racist and I've got questions about the president. I said, what questions? They've clearly proven he was born in Hawaii. They've come with the birth certificate. I don't believe that. We can't authenticate that. Authenticate what? I would say to him. You're playing on this whole feeling, Mr. Trump, of he's other than us and he's African. He has not had to do anything but make reckless, unfounded charges against the president. But you've come to know that's just Trump. And you're going to get that kind of double meaning in any encounter with him. He is the epitome of the American dream to some of his supporters, but he is also the personification of the American nightmare, because here's a guy that has all the money in the world, can do anything he wants, but he's still blaming others and has a chip on his shoulder. He's Archie Bunker with $1 billion.
1, 2, 3.
I knew about him because in my business classes, we actually did a case study on a book called The Art of the Deal, one of his most successful books. And I was so fascinated because it was written with these time codes, and so it ran through Donald Trump's day. Call this person, call the attorney, call that, and the interworkings of this great mind. He talked about destroying your competition. He was just so in your face. It was almost like a game of chess. And I'm an avid chess player. And so when I read the book, I just kept thinking that this is just one big game of chess to him. I heard about The Apprentice. They were calling it a job interview. If you think you have what it takes, if you want to live like me, you will apply to be the apprentice, you know. And we bought it. Who doesn't want to be a billionaire? Who doesn't want to live in Trump Tower and have people wait on you hand and foot? Donald Trump is the most brilliant marketing and branding mind you'll ever meet, bar none. He was already a household name, but he became a superstar, like a rock star.
You know, the show has gotten great reviews. I've gotten great reviews. Everything's gotten great reviews except for one thing, my hair.
Everybody was saying, you're fired. Everybody wanted a piece of the Donald. I've seen people meet him and fall in love with him and follow everything he says, buy everything that he's selling, sign up for, line up for, cheer for.
I am officially running for President of the United States, and we are going to make our country great again.
He understands that as long as people are entertained, as long as they're captivated, as long as they stay intrigued, they keep watching, they keep tuning in, he knows his angles, he knows his one-liners to turn it up a little bit, turn it down a little bit, push a bit, pull back. He knows his audience, he knows what they have an appetite for, and he gives it to them.
We are going to take our country back. We've lost our country. We're going to take it back.
He became a pop cultural icon. I think he became addicted to it. He wanted more of it. Couldn't get enough.
Wow. Get those teleprompters out of here. We're going to have some fun, right?
You know, this is one of my prized possessions. Nowadays, I keep it on lock and key. New York Military Academy is where Donald Trump got to be a CEO in the first place. That's the first time that he was in charge of his own company. Oh, here's the page where I'm right across from Donald Trump. When you look at the picture of him in the yearbook, he's got a star on each side of his collar. That's because he was an honor cadet. Donald Trump was a natural CEO. Parlayed his smile and his different attributes so that he got along with everybody, and everybody tended to like him. He was 17 years old, had about 40 of us under his command. He was my captain, so I got to know him extremely well. Donald was a little bit of a rebellious guy, and he needed to know how to channel that. He was always striking me to be a man on a mission. Even back then, he got everybody cooperating and doing what he needed to do. The value system that we had there was you never lied, cheated, or stole from another cadet, period. I mean, it wasn't a rule as much as it was in our blood. One of our cadets stole from another cadet, stole a cigarette lighter, a Zippo cigarette lighter. I brought him to Donald Trump, and then Donald made it extremely clear that nobody was to do anything, and no harm befall this guy, and people obeyed him. Donald took him over to the administrative office, and he was expelled. We lived a very regimented lifestyle. Bugle would blow at the crack of dawn. We'd have to be in formation 15 minutes later, ready for inspection. You don't go home on the weekends. If you're lucky, your parents come up and visit you on Sunday, and they can take you out to lunch. His mother and father came up frequently. They were tight and loving, especially his mother. Donald was well-known and well-liked. He was elected as a ladies' man at the end of the year, and it's not as though we had girls in the school. And, you know, I hear Donald Trump say that it's one of the best things that ever happened to him was going to NEMA, New York Military Academy. The values that we've received by being in that environment for that length of time, I know to this day that it's still in Donald Trump's guts. I know it's in mine. The knot on my tie is a double Windsor knot. That's indoctrinated in us. This is what we would tie every day. If Donald Trump is wearing a tie today, he's wearing it with a double Windsor knot. The Donald Trump that we see on TV today, he's the same guy that he always was.
I'm really rich. I'll show you that in a second.
Let's not mistake that. Donald Trump is from a very rich family, not even like a sort of rich family. Fred Trump amassed an estate conservatively worth $500 million. His father's wealth and his father's political connections were core to Donald's own ability to rise and get deals done.
I just want to keep busy and keep active and be interested in what I do, and that's all there is to life as far as I'm concerned. I really am not looking to make tremendous amounts of money. I'm looking to enjoy my life, and if that happens to go with it, that's fabulous.
Over the years, I've had several meetings with Donald Trump, and you got a sense in conversations with him that he saw himself as an outsider. At first, I said, oh, he's giving me a line, but he really believed that. He felt he was not part of what they used to call the blue bloods that ran New York, and that he was cracking into them, and his money and glamour and his name recognition never made him feel like he was part of the real estate establishment. He felt he was a Queens guy, and he not only seemed to want to break in, but he wanted to almost mock them and redo the skyline as Trump.
Donald Trump called me a ball buster, of which I am proud. I'm a New Yorker through and through, born and bred, the late 60s through the 70s. It was a pretty dicey time, the worst years of New York. The fears were being mugged. If you had an engagement ring, you turned it around or you wore a glove over it. There was Son of Sam, the Bronx is burning, murders, riots, and rape. Donald Trump was one of the early ones to take advantage of New York when it was down in a somewhat positive way.
When New York was almost broke and other builders were jumping ship, Trump took a chance on the old Commodore Hotel.
He understood New York was in trouble or just beginning to turn around, and he jumped in to take advantage and do his thing. Then he came to the West Side and he met his Waterloo.
Trump's flashiest project is still on the drawing board. He and architect Helmut Jahn want to build a giant complex of offices, apartments, and shops on a 13-block site along the Hudson River.
It would have created a 60-foot wall along the West Side, under which was a 9,000-car parking lot, a 2 million square foot shopping mall, on top of which would have been a 150-story tallest building in the world, flanked by 6 other tallest buildings in the world. Totally would have decimated everything for miles around, not just the West Side. Trump was a formidable figure at that time. He was asking for adjustments in the environmental regulations, and the city was trying to do that. The effort to fight Trump started at my dining room table in the way local fights often start. We would have events, we would have petitions. We had Tony Randall, we had Paul Newman, Bill Moyers, Lauren Bacall. At one point, we had 7,000 members. We were not intimidated by him. We were not overwhelmed by his bluster.
I think it was a level of competence, and we drive and we push and we get things done.
We had a mission, we knew what we were doing. We sued the city. This included meetings with the Donald, who was as arrogant as one can imagine.
You're going to have to start pushing these people now a little bit, because it's getting a little ridiculous as far as I'm concerned.
Trump accepted our alternative vision for the site, which is essentially what got built. He understood that what was emerging was a much more reasonable, doable project. I love this moment. At one point, he actually conceded, yeah, I know you guys made this project better. And I looked at him and I said, Donald, someday I want you to say that in public.
I got everything I wanted. 40 years of tax abatement. People would say, how did you get 40 years? I said, because I didn't ask for 50. It was so easy.
I always tell people I want on my tombstone that Donald Trump called me a ball buster.
At 21, I was accepted into Cornell Medical School. So I settled in New York, in Manhattan in 1967, in what was known as the East Village, at a kind of turbulent era. I felt the East Village was just perfect for a rebel like me because it had a long tradition of rebels and people who fought the government and fought the establishment. Donald Trump showed up in low-rise Soho wanting to build a condo tower disguised as a hotel to skirt the zoning laws when it was actually going to be a residential building, which we don't permit. Try to think that we Soho people were hicks and could take advantage of us. Sorry, Donald. If anyone filed off the pumpkin truck at you because you don't know what you were getting into here. You don't tell downtowners how it's going to go. We tell you what you're going to do to keep us happy. You don't tell us what we need. We immediately sued the buildings department. We know this is going to be a residential building, not a hotel. Now, who would pay $2,000 a square foot to buy into a lawsuit? No one. And he failed. And after a while, he didn't sell a single unit. As a matter of fact, it went into foreclosure and it went up to auction. So we got what we want. We wanted a hotel there. That's what we got. Donald Trump did not get what he wanted. He didn't get his residential building. All he got was bankruptcy. Trump, just do the right thing. Obey the laws. You're not better than anyone else.
I have been a civil rights attorney, a women's rights attorney, an attorney for minorities who have been deprived of their rights, denied their rights to enjoy equal opportunity in this country. We have spoken up for the rights of women and minorities when it was very unpopular and controversial to do so, and still is in many ways. Jenna Talikova applied for the Miss Universe, Miss Canada pageant. After she was accepted, the pageant decided they were going to exclude Jenna from the competition because they cited a rule that a contestant was required to be a naturally born female.
Do you identify as trans or as a woman?
To me, I am a woman. I've always been a woman.
Jenna's rights had been violated. We decided that we would have a press conference to call on Donald Trump, who was the owner of the pageant, to make sure that this blatant discrimination would not continue.
Have you met Donald Trump?
Not yet.
Jenna had a Canadian passport. She had a driver's license. She had a birth certificate that indicated that she was female. And that should be more than sufficient for Mr. Trump.
She did not ask Mr. Trump to see the photos of his birth, to view his anatomy, to prove that he was male.
After we indicated that we were not interested in photos of his anatomy, Mr. Trump called TMZ and indicated that I would be very impressed with his penis. I then responded, I don't have a magnifying glass strong enough to see something that small. Mr. Trump needs to understand the world does not revolve around his penis or anyone else's penis. If it ever did, those days are gone.
I don't think she's a good attorney. I think she's a very poor attorney.
It was very interesting because, of course, he was insulting me. and attacking me personally. I don't get upset by that because the message it sends to me is I've won on my argument and I'm right. Ultimately, he conceded. I think that Mr. Trump recognized that what was at the heart of it was a real civil rights issue. But at the same time, there was a smokescreen being created by Mr. Trump.
Gloria got involved 2 days afterwards. The decision was already made, so she's obviously just in this for publicity. Had I known she was involved, maybe I wouldn't have made that decision because she's easy to beat.
Here's what's ironic. Maybe a year or two later, I was at Fox News Channel. Suddenly, Mr. Trump came running into the green room where we were seated. And I thought, oh no, I haven't had a chance to warn my client. What is he going to say? What is he going to do? And he came up, I introduced him to my client, and he said, you have the absolute best attorney you ever could have. She is relentless until she gets you justice. So never, ever fire her, because you'll never get anyone better. And he smiled and shook my hand, and then he left. On the other hand, what he was saying when the cameras were on him was very, very different. Maybe the real Donald Trump is both of those people.
Donald Trump wanted to be in the NFL, owning a very prime piece of real estate in Manhattan. Donald thought the NFL could probably handle a third team in New York, especially if they played in Manhattan. Donald wasn't invited into the NFL. NFL ownership resisted his efforts to get into that very exclusive club. There was going to be an upstart, the United States Football League, starting in 1983. Now, all of a sudden, Donald had a new toy, which was a pro football team.
We now have strong ownership. The NFL, when it was most successful, had 6 teams. At its zenith, at its highest point, they had 6 teams. That's the number of teams that we should have.
He didn't have to dig too deep to see that there was another agenda, and it was his own agenda. The mandate for the USFL was, we're going to play football in the spring when we are the only game in town, right? When there's no other football. He comes barreling in and immediately says, if God wanted football to be played in the spring, he wouldn't have invented baseball.
My attitude has always been the spring was a wasteland, and I came into this league on the basis and predicated on the fact that I thought the league would move to the fall, and they have.
In the 80s, there were only 3 networks. All had relationships with the NFL. The USFL had decided to go to the fall. None of the networks were going to pick them up. The stadiums weren't available to them. They didn't have any money. They had already lost, by most accounts, a couple $100 million. Trump led the USFL into a lawsuit claiming antitrust violations by the NFL.
Based on what everybody tells me, based on common sense of the law, there is virtually no chance that we can lose this lawsuit.
Sure enough, the USFL won the battle and lost the war. The judge did rule that the NFL was in violation of antitrust laws, but because of the way the case was managed, they were able to portray themselves as the underdog on the defense against the guy in the $5,000 suit. Donald Trump was portrayed as the bully who wanted the whole pie. The judge awarded $1 to the USFL. Now, because it's an antitrust case, it's treble damages, which means it was a $3 settlement. It was the death of the league, plain and simple. In 2009, ESPN launched a new series called 30 for 30, groundbreaking documentary series. The ESPN executives asked me to direct one. And I said, well, the only real interest I'd have is if I could do a film called Who Killed the USFL, pointing to you-know-who. I went after Donald, and he resisted. He had a very adept gatekeeper. And I was writing letters, I was writing emails, I was calling on the telephone, no response whatsoever. And I was asked to do an interview about the upcoming series in Sports Business Journal. Strangely, the phone rang the next day, and there was that same gatekeeper saying, Mr. Trump will see you now.
We're going to do this quickly, right? Where's my camera? How come it's not on a stand?
it just felt like he didn't want to be there. Everything annoyed him. He wanted to go to the next question, and you could see him fidgeting. It's like a little kid, you know, in detention. We got exactly what we wanted, and he did his best to make his case. And then I came with the coup de grace, which was the check the judge awarded to the USFL.
I wanted you to look at it.
Now, that's got to be a smile, right? Nuh-uh. That was it, though. It was the breaking point for him. He walked out, patted me patronizingly on the shoulder, left the room. And he said, I hope you understand that, you know, I did the best I could. And I said, well, Donald, you know, I'm just a filmmaker, and I'm going to be as objective and fair as I can be. And we're going to have a big splashy premiere. ESPN's going to invite you. We'll send a limo. I sure hope you can join us. And he said, well, that'll be up to you, won't it? I sent him a note. He sent me a note back. When Donald writes a letter back, he just takes this black magic marker and scribbles over your letter. He called it a third-rate film. He called it dishonest. Best wishes, Donald Trump. P.S. You're a loser.
I wasn't going to be in the projects forever, and I knew that because I had a mother who allowed us to dream and to explore and to use our imagination. With all my education, I really got my first degree from the School of Hard Knocks. I learned very quickly that the world was tough, and you had to be tougher to survive. I went into the White House right after my master's degree, and then I had an opportunity to volunteer at the DNC and to work for a civil rights advocate who took me under her wing. She helped me get into the White House to go to work for Vice President Al Gore. But then I left Gore's office and I went to work for Bill Clinton. That was probably the most tumultuous White House in recent history. We had an impeachment hearing, for crying out loud. So to say that I was turned off by politics is an understatement. I heard about The Apprentice from my colleagues at the DNC. They were also very ambitious go-getters, and they were talking about this new show that Donald Trump was doing with Mark Burnett. I didn't tell any of them. I'm like, I'm gonna apply. Donald Trump wanted somebody who was going to fight to become CEO of his company. People who were like him, outspoken, in your face, aggressive. I knew that my introduction was going to set the tone for my relationship with Donald Trump. And I had to distinguish myself from these other people. Donald Trump didn't intimidate me. The process intimidated me. There were no clear rules. It was whatever Donald Trump said, whatever he felt at that moment, that's who went home, whether it was fair or not. It was the Donald Trump show, and that's what intimidated me. I knew anytime I went in the boardroom, I was in trouble. Because the more I pushed the envelope, the more successful I became. The more aggressive I was, the more I argued, the more I fought, the more insulting I was, the bigger the brand got, the bigger the name got, the more people wanted to see me on television. Ultimately, I heard those fatal words, fire, the hand. My ambition was always bigger than just The Apprentice. I was playing the game within the game. I didn't just want the viewers of The Apprentice to know my name. I wanted the world to know my name. So when people ask me about Donald, whether or not that's really him, when Donald is playing the game within the game too, and he's winning. And when he's not winning, he changes the game, and they can't keep up. He's not polarizing, he's brilliant. And that terrifies people.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
People are just tired. They're tired of politicians telling them one thing and doing another, but they trust what he says.
You're my role model, sir! You're my role model!
People who support Donald, they know that what he says is what he's going to do. Because what he said in the past, he's always done.
We're bringing our jobs back, folks. We're bringing our jobs back. We're going to bring them back.
Trump is the reality star we've been waiting for. There are a lot of things I see and many people see when we look at Donald Trump, but since he started running for president, I see him in a completely different way. I didn't imagine Trump had any possible shot of being a serious candidate until he gave the Mexican rapist speech.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
That wasn't part of his prepared speech. That was from the heart. I knew any candidate who ever ran pushing America's interests over the interests of foreigners and a few plutocrats, I knew he'd soar to the top of the polls. I had been begging Republican presidential candidates, begging them to pick up the immigration issue, and I couldn't get them to pick it up. Meanwhile, Trump sees me being interviewed by Jorge Ramos and is instantly requesting a copy of the book, Adios America. The big theme of it is Mexican rape. 2 weeks later, he's giving his announcement speech, goes off script, and starts talking about the sorts of crimes, the drug dealers and rapists that Mexico was sending.
This is hate language. This will incite violence not only against Mexican Americans, Mexicans, but also against migrants.
And so a week later, when he hadn't backed down with the whole world exploding, I thought, this is it. This is the candidacy I've been waiting for.
It's not about me, it's about you, believe me. This is a movement.
I have spent a lot of time with Donald Trump. Probably the most intense time was between about 2003 and 2005, when I was reporting on him for the New York Times, and then when I later wrote the book. Trump Nation is a place where self-promotion gets you ahead at the expense of concrete accomplishments, and having your name on everything from vodka and mattresses to underwear and skyscrapers means that you're successful.
When it comes to great stakes, I've just raised the stakes.
It really made for this interesting moment to write about someone whose actual business holdings were a tangle and a mess, but who had this public persona through The Apprentice as the god of the American business landscape. We spent a lot of time crisscrossing the country on his various jets. He loves potato chips. He had a feed bag of potato chips next to him. We drove around Palm Beach in his red Ferrari, which I don't think he knew how to drive very well. He kept grinding the gears out every time we would roll up towards a stop sign or take off. He had a lot of trouble getting the car into gear. He loved the idea of me doing a book, and I think he saw it as us doing a book together. I was surprised he wanted to cooperate, but he later said to me that if it was a negative book, he would just come after me personally and say that I was a whack job and a scumbag and his whole litany of well-worn insults that we know he uses.
Dan Rather's a loser. Rosie's basically a loser. He's obviously in love with Adolf Hitler in some form.
Right before the book came out, he asked me if I would share the cover art with him. Shortly after he received it, he called me and he said, "I love this. I look like Superman. I love it." But he still sued me. He still sued me. He sued me for $5 billion. And I think that's the largest libel lawsuit in U.S. history. Claimed that I had done irreversible damage to his reputation and his ability to do business. The thing he latched onto were 3 pages of the book that focused on his net worth and offered an accounting of his completely outlandish history of exaggerating how much money he has.
I don't want to sound braggadocious, but I'm the biggest developer in the city by far.
Completely untrue. He has never been the biggest real estate developer in New York by any measure, whether it's the value of the properties he owns or their square footage. I welcomed going to court with him over the merits of my book. I think he thought my publisher was just going to roll over. Once he got past the initial shock that we actually were going to litigate aggressively against him, he then realized because he was suing me based on his wealth, that opened him up to us getting all of his tax returns, all of his financial records, and he's, of course, never made those public. During the suit, we produced an accounting of his net worth done by one of his banks, and Deutsche Bank had assessed his net worth at that time in 2005 or so as about $788 million. And that was at a time when he was telling me he was worth $5 to $6 billion. We ended up hiring one of the best white-collar attorneys in the United States. He asked Donald how he ended up arriving at his own assessments of his net worth. And Donald's response essentially was, well, it depends upon how I feel, and it depends on how I feel any given day of the week, and it really depends upon my own feelings to myself. We litigated with Donald. We stripped the bark off of him like an old tree, and he lost. I think his self-worth and his identity is so wrapped up in this notion of him being a mega billionaire, and he's so wildly insecure at the end of the day, that if he's not seen as someone who's in the top 100 or 200 of the Forbes 400 list, then he's nobody.
I look at people as being, in many cases, pretty vicious. And unless you're going to have a certain way, you're going to be eaten alive.
Politicians are supposed to make a lot of promises they don't intend to keep. They're not supposed to tell us what they really mean. I've never seen anything like this Donald Trump before. No one but an eccentric billionaire who actually loves America could possibly do what he's doing, because the donors would be on his back saying, oh, no, that's not our message. It shows a lot of character that he's willing to lose money, willing to lose friends. In his neighborhood, he is not taking the popular position.
From self-funding, by the way, all these guys are taking money. They're all bloodsuckers.
I never would have looked at him before and thought, that's the man I want running for president. But boy, do I love him now.
USA! USA!
I've never been at political events where people are just so happy because he's finally talking about immigration and trade and caring about Americans and flipping the bird to both the media and to political correctness. That these are the issues people have been waiting for someone to take their side on. Every one of his rallies, what's the biggest applause line? I'm gonna build a wall. That brings them to their feet. That is always the biggest applause line. If he realizes that he's been going on too long, he's starting to get boring, he said something the crowd doesn't like, if he wants to bring him back, he starts talking about the wall.
It's going to be a real wall, a big wall, a strong wall. Nobody's coming through unless it's legal. Nobody is coming through.
And the media refuse to talk about his issues and then turn around and say, what's the appeal? We don't get it. Well, talk about what his issues are. I mean, Donald Trump's whole candidacy is the collapse of the American dream, and not in the cliched sense, not necessarily even in the money sense. Having a job is important. Having self-respect is important. Caring about your own family, your own town, your own country, as opposed to the entire rest of the world. It's absolutely unforgivable that neither party stands for that. And Trump is bursting through saying, I'm going to put Americans first. That's his novel platform? And there's nobody who can compete with him.
This is war. Don't we view this as war? It's war.
A lot of the American populace right now is very angry. They keep sending people to Washington to change things, and nothing changes. It just continues to get worse. And unless you have a combatant, nothing's going to change. America has become very much like ancient Rome. The city's crumbling around you, and everybody wants to go to the Colosseum. That's where we are. Donald Trump happens to understand that. A lot of people said he has to change now, and he has to become more presidential. But the fact of the matter is, we are at the WWE Raw stage right now. And if you can't speak to a WWE Raw audience, you're not going anywhere. I don't care how logical you are.
The world laughs at us. They won't be laughing if I'm president.
I really believe that Donald Trump's end game when he began running for president was he was going to develop and build more political clout and make himself a real player. And I think somewhere along the way, as he began seeing those crowds and seeing people coming, he really said, I can win this nomination. But deep down inside, I'm not convinced he wants to be the president. I think if he woke up and had to manage the country, it would be a horrifying thought to him because he doesn't even run his businesses like that. He's not a manager, but he's an unparalleled promoter. And he doesn't have to run things if he can get away with playing the mirrors, and he plays it better than anyone we've known in our lifetime.
We have huge deficits, we have huge unemployment, we have a huge problem, and we're not respected.
I'm sure I will be denouncing him for the next 8 years for doing this or that thing, but I do think he's going to build a wall. I do think he's going to limit, I hope totally cut off, Muslim immigration, reduce overall immigration, deport illegal aliens. If you just take the shackles off law enforcement, we're going to get rid of a lot of illegal immigrants. And the American people have been begging for that for such a long time, but the politicians wouldn't listen.
We have thousands of people trying to get in. Should we let them in or not? No.
I don't care how many properties have his name on it. God bless him. He can become as rich as he can become. But other people also have to have rights. When he attacks minorities or women who've been denied their rights, that is not so much a statement about his target as it is about him. About what he's willing to do, how he's willing to do it, the kind of person that he thinks he's entitled to be. It's one thing to be entertained, but it's another thing to realize that whoever's sitting in the White House is going to make life and death decisions, and that's not a laughing matter.
I would bomb the out of him.
Ironically, what scares me about Donald Trump is what scares the Republican Party about him, is how do you get this contained again? And how long will this run? And where does this lead? It's like when I was a kid going to Coney Island and you get on the Cyclone. You don't see where this ride is going to end. You just hope it ends and we're still on the tracks.
It's too bad what's happening, but we're not going to be a great country in 10 years if this keeps going.
People always ask me, if Donald wins, would you go and work in his White House? And I say, absolutely. I think it's a rare opportunity to serve this country that I love. And also, I like guns and money. Commerce, Treasury, Defense, State Department, wherever you need me, Mr. Trump, I'm there. The worst thing you can do is underestimate Donald Trump. Never, ever, ever underestimate Donald Trump.
I think a Trump White House would be about 50 stories tall. It would be painted gold. There'd be blinking lights up and down Pennsylvania Avenue. Air Force One would get diamond encrusted. You would get more Sunday night fireside chats on TV with the president than you ever wanted in your entire life. He might be a good president other than that, but anyone who thinks that Donald Trump is going away is sorely mistaken.